Many who watch the Left Hook, my interviews with Vicky Ward and a few other folks have said, get Zev Shalev on, who is of Narrative, the Substack, because we want to know about the Epstein money trail. And I said, Zev, who's this guy Zev? So I said, all right, I'll let me research. And then and Lev Parnas put us in contact, and we were finally able to talk because one of the questions that even the people who have written books on Epstein and Ghislaine, people who have followed the story for 2 decades, the question that they still have, that everyone has how did Jeffrey Epstein, a man who's a college dropout, a man who, despite being a college dropout with no real discernible skills, get this cushy job,
Hmm.
thanks to Bill Barr's father as a math teacher in a private university in New York, and then where he, allegedly did Epstein things such as harassing girls, but then somehow failed up, got a job in Wall Street. Again, college dropout, working for Bear Stearns, and moving around money for folks. And then somehow, got involved in this huge Ponzi scheme, the largest Ponzi scheme scandal ever. He doesn't go to jail, but his partner goes to jail, who later has since died and said that, Epstein was his right-hand man. And then somehow, Zev, just, Leslie Wexner, who's still alive, by the way, billionaire, CEO of Victoria's Secret, just decides, this guy who fabricated his past and who was a college dropout and is hella shady, let me give him my power of attorney. And let me gift him the $77 million townhouse in New York, as
That
one does.
happens. It happens. It
As
happens.
it
You
happens.
haven't been gifted a $77 million
Not
mansion?
yet.
Yeah.
Not yet, but the day is still young.
Yeah.
And I was just talking to Vicky Ward at 1 p.m. and even she mentioned, we were talking about, I'm going to have this conversation up later at 12 p.m., the Vicky's conversation. She was talking about Ghislaine and how, Ghislaine meets Jeffrey when all of a sudden he's flush with this money. And the question that everyone still has to this day, as this story is rocking the world, 89% of Americans are following this, Donald Trump can't shut the F up, further incriminates himself, is how, Zev? How did a college dropout with no discernible skills get so much money and become connected to so many people who are the creme de la creme in philanthropy and politics and academia? And with that, Zev, I yield the floor to you.
I would answer that question by saying that he was a shrewd criminal mind. That's how he was described to Stephen Hoffenberg, that partner in the Ponzi scheme that you mentioned. The reason Hoffenberg landed up hiring him was because he's a shrewd criminal mind with very little morals and ethics. That was how he was described by the person recommending him, and I'll get to that later on. But what you have here is someone who is obviously brilliantly in terms of mathematics, in terms of running systems, in terms of achieving these financial wizardry that he was able to do. And he did fail up because of that skill set, And how did he get the money? Well, I know how he got the money that he got when Ghislaine Maxwell arrived in New York in 91. She famously took, after her father's death, Ghislaine takes the Concorde, really expensive flight at the time, all the way from London to New York. And people were questioning why such an expensive flight for someone who was restricted to just, I think it was $80,000 a year at the time because of her dad's bankruptcy. He had stolen millions out of the Mirror pension group, had bankrupted that company and a whole bunch of other companies on the way to his death. So she was restricted as well.
His mysterious death.
Yeah. And so, she arrives in New York into the arms of her new lover, because she had a previous lover that was somebody else. And her new lover is Jeffrey Epstein, this famously rich billionaire. But, no one quite sure how he got that money. Now, in the series we're doing at narrative.org, NARATIV.org, I'll keep spelling it. We're doing The Greatest Heist. And as part of that Greatest Heist, we explore the final days of Robert Maxwell. Now, we haven't got to this chapter, so I can't give you everything about this, but the indication is that, we know, because we've broadcast this before, that despite the fact that they met in 91 officially, their actual meeting was a decade earlier, in 1981, in London. And this is according to Ari Ben Menashe, who's Robert Maxwell's former handler, who worked for Israeli military intelligence at the time. And he told me that he met Jeff Epstein in the early 1980s in Robert Maxwell's office, in the Mirror offices in London, where he was introduced by Maxwell as a bright young guy that they wanted to bring on board the Iran-Contra scam or scheme that they were doing at the time, and that his bosses had approved of him. In other words, Ari Ben Menashe's bosses had approved of him. And so from his perspective, it looked to him like that Robert Maxwell, viewed Jeff Epstein as a suitor for Ghislaine Maxwell and her future husband. And that's
Mm.
how they first met. They started dating in the early 80s. Now, that's a chapter of his life that was obscured for a long period of time until I broadcasted in 2019. That was unknown to people that they had met at that time, or that he had even been in the Europe at that time. And certainly that he had been in contact with Robert Maxwell. But it's sort of, when you ask the question of, well, how did he get that money? You also have to look at, well, how did Robert Maxwell lose all that money, and where did all that money go? And if you
Mm.
add the two things together, you can sort of piece together where I'm heading, which is that money may have been Maxwell's money that landed up making his billions at the start of Jeffrey Epstein's so-called romance in the early 90s when Ghislaine moved to New York.
Yeah, and you're not the only one to try to make that connection or that insinuation, right? Because I think it's important, as you mentioned, that Maxwell made all his money through theft, corruption. That seems to be a running theme through all these people: Trump, Maxwell,
Mhm.
Epstein, right? And then he has this mysterious death. And
Mhm.
then after that mysterious death, some people have insinuated that some of that money then somehow might have gone vis-a-vis through Ghislaine, who was his favorite child, to Jeffrey.
Yeah.
Do we have any smoking guns? Do we have any type of evidence that might actually link Maxwell dying mysteriously? And everyone says, right, he was a spy for Israel
Mhm. Mhm.
as well.
And
Uh,
KGB,
and
both.
KGB and
Yeah.
defrauded all these people,
Mhm.
and got these millions through fraud, and then dies in disgrace, mysteriously dies,
Mhm.
falls off his yacht, drowned in the water, and people always say it's a bit suspicious. And I try my best, folks, as you know, on the left hook. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, so I always try what's fact is fact, and then when
Mhm.
people speculate, I always try to put a speculation, right? And then, like you said, Galen, then of course his favorite daughter, who was distraught, then runs in the arms of Jeffrey Epstein, who somehow is just flush with money.
Mhm.
Do we have any smoking guns that actually shows a linkage between Robert's death, then the money transfer to Jeffrey?
I mean, Jeffrey Epstein was very good at hiding money flow, especially offshore. So I don't have any of the receipts actually showing the money flowing. But I have an eyewitness, and I haven't reported it yet, but I have an eyewitness who shared with me that Epstein was involved in the crisis that Maxwell was having financially at the time of his death, and that he
Mm.
was attempting to sort it out. He was attempting to create a plan around that. Another source also told me that Epstein was a person of interest in Maxwell's murder or death, and never really materialized as anything. But he was a person of interest, and so those two things combined certainly suggest that he was involved in the final stages of Maxwell's life, and to what extent that meant moving money, well, it's hard to tell, except for the fact that he just had a lot of money suddenly after that. He just suddenly out of nowhere, he got all these millions of dollars and was a billionaire. So,
Yeah.
what drove that? I can only imagine that money came from Maxwell. Now, he had other things that he'd, done, but certainly not enough to be the billionaire that he declared himself in the 90s.
And also, can you stress the fact that, and you mentioned it because, what's common to you and to me might not be common to everyone else. Uh, uh, Epstein was apparently one of his gifts, if you will, was he was able to hide money
Mhm.
or take money offshore for his clients, and then once it went offshore, sometimes that money didn't go back to the clients. Can you talk to us about what Epstein did with clients' money as it came to hiding it?
Yeah, I mean, he was a specialist in collapsing companies. He really was, he called himself a bounty hunter for really famous rich people or countries, but in reality, he was just a very, very good at collapsing things. Like Donald Trump, there's a similarity there in their ability to go bankrupt and then somehow revive themselves very spectacularly wealthy still in their next chapter. And that is one of the key things that we were looking at in our investigation: is how come they all keep going bankrupt but are still the wealthiest people in the world. At one point, Donald Trump was bankrupt in, I think, 96 or 90, in the early 90s, and then came back in 96, in the Forbes 400 immediately. Now, a lot of people are really good at making money, but to make hundreds of millions of dollars appear out of nowhere is very complicated. Except in Jeff Epstein's world, that was the kind of thing that he did. What he did with Towers Financial and Hoffenberg was collapse that company. He was there to really launder money, and then once it was time, they collapsed it, and he got away, according to Hoffenberg, with $450 million. Um, so all that stuff just adds up and adds up, and you see, and how did he do it? Through some financial wizardry, through a lot of moving money around. And I think one of the key things that we're discovering is that Donald Trump's parallel enterprise was also involved. Now, it's hard to find the smoking gun there, but you can sort of see that there are parallel things going on between the network that is Donald Trump's network, which is aligned to the Russian mob, and then Epstein's network, which is also aligned to the Russians, but through different means, and also to the Israelis. So it gets kind of, you get in the weeds of intelligence things, and that's where people sort of sometimes get a little lost. But the truth of it is, this was an organized crime enterprise that was also backed by intelligence agencies, and that both of these men, Epstein and Trump, were involved in organized crime.
There's sex, there's money, and there's also foreign, countries. And a lot of people say that, you don't have to be a spy, if you will. It doesn't mean you have to be an active informant, but that also means that foreign intelligence can use you, right? You can be used as an influencer. You can be groomed without you realizing it, right? And this is where, when it comes to intelligence, right? There's been rumors, right? Epstein was intelligence, there was foreign intelligence, and the two countries that keep coming up again when you follow the money trail is often Russia and Israel. I want to start with Israel for a second, right? And I want to separate fact from speculation, right? One fact that has always been interesting to me is Ehud Barak, who's the Israeli prime minister, former Israeli prime minister, was also the head of the IDF, right? Like the top of the IDF. Visited Epstein numerous times, right, in New York, and talked to us. Is there a connection between Epstein and Israel? What do we know? What's fact? What's fiction?
Well, it's so interesting you mentioned Ehud Barak. As I was told by Ari Ben-Benashi, both Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeff Epstein were agents, seen as agents working for the Israeli military intelligence. A lot of people call it Mossad. It's not Mossad. It's the Israeli military intelligence. It's an important distinction to make, because who was in charge of the military at the time in Israel was the very person you just mentioned. Prime Minister Ehud Barak was the prime minister. So in fact, this was his agents. And that's maybe explains why he was visiting with his agents when he came to the United States. What they were involved in, according to Ari Ben-Menashe, was blackmail of politicians. And they were doing it in order to make sure the Clinton presidency didn't swing too far left. They were really nervous at the time that Clinton was going to be, too pro-Palestine in his negotiations with Israel, and they ultimately did not want that. So they wanted to compromise him and compromise everybody else around him, so that policy around the Middle East would stay, sort of more pro-Israel than pro-Palestine. And that's, that explains his trajectory there. But they obviously were doing this for a long period of time. There's examples of at least 3 known politicians who were potentially blackmailed. There's also Prince Andrew, as we've discovered. Maybe others were involved, but that they were working for Israeli military intelligence, I heard from Ari Ben-Menashe, and I heard from Steve Hoffenberg independently. These are people who don't know each other, apparently. And both of them told me it was Israel that they worked for. One of them on the record, the other one was off the record, but he's dead now, and I can say that he told me that. I had it confirmed by a bunch of other sources as well, independently. And I think the Ehud Barak connection sort of seals it, Plus, they were invested in this company called Carbon. And Carbon was an Israeli Defense Force front company, basically. And both Epstein and Ehud Barak were invested in that as part of the investors, along with Peter Thiel, interestingly enough, and Victor Vekselberg. So there's a bunch of people, you might have encountered in this investigation before. So, I think, yes, there were alignment with Israel, and there's clearly an alignment with the KGB as well, or the FSB, which is the successor to the KGB, in that there were a lot of Russian operatives around Epstein. I think 2 known spies were often surrounding him as assistants or other things, Plus, he had a connection with the deputy minister of education or something like that. Maybe the minister is wrong, but a deputy minister in the Kremlin, um, Boyakov or something like that. Sergei Boyakov, I think was his name. And so there's Russian intelligence both in Epstein's DNA, and there's Russian intelligence in Maxwell's DNA. There's Israeli intelligence in Epstein, and there's Israeli intelligence in Maxwell. It's not hard to see how those two things may have been passed down almost hereditarily between these two men.
And folks, if you've been following me, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I always try to separate fact from fiction, and I
Mm,
always try to give you, this is what's on the record, this is what's speculation. But I want, if you're sitting here watching right now, you're like, "Whoa, this is too much. No way." I want to remind everyone that Jeffrey Epstein got a sweetheart deal in 2008. That sweetheart deal was arranged by Alex Acosta. Alex
mhm,
Acosta was the U.S. attorney in Florida at the time, who later became Donald Trump's labor secretary. According to Wall Street Journal, there's reporting, even though Alex Acosta hasn't said this on the record, but the reporting says that when people asked him, how could you give, how could you give this predator a sweetheart deal where he literally just
mm,
self-reports folks to jail, right? He's free to commit, pedophilia and prey on women for 6 out of the 7 days of the week.
mm,
Alex Acosta allegedly said, "I was told that Epstein is intelligence."
mm. Yep. Because he was intelligence. And I mean, look, if you think about it, his 38-year crime spree, he spent 13 months in so-called jail, but it wasn't really jail. It was like this half sentence where he could leave, I think, every day for 12 hours of the day. So, I mean, it wasn't really a jail sentence, and that's all he got. And then he got that sweetheart deal. So clearly, this is not the justice system working. It's justice. This is just someone being allowed to operate with impunity inside America. And that's very troubling. When you look at the broad history of the last 50 years and what happened after Watergate, so this sort of the elimination of the CIA's ability to do any black ops, and then it sort of was farmed out to all these independent organizations and to various foreign governments by George Bush. It's where the trouble sort of began, and there was lots of spy agencies integrating with organized criminals, doing all sorts of nefarious things, and having the cover of intelligence to do these nefarious things. And you can look at both Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein as examples of that.
And, it's one of those situations where then you think, okay, Watergate, yeah, government lies. Oh, My Lai, government lies. Abu Ghraib, government lies.
Mhm,
Iran-Contra affair, government lies.
mhm,
And now you're dealing with billions of dollars. You're dealing with an international sex trafficking ring, right? You're dealing with powerful people. And so it isn't that surprising to think then, Zev, well, really wealthy, powerful people have a lot of money and are very well connected and have the means to suppress the truth. Oh, I don't know. When it comes to the videotape of Epstein's suicide, we were told, and this is from yesterday, and I want to
yeah,
get your thoughts on this because there's so much breaking news now.
mm,
The Trump administration told us, well, we have the tape, but there's a minute missing. Wired said that actually there was 2 minutes and 50 seconds missing. And then yesterday, CBS News folks says that they have a government source right now in the Trump administration that
mm,
says that the Trump administration, Pam Bondi and others, actually have access to the complete unredacted tape. Wall Street Journal, that flaming leftist mag, Wall Street Journal,
yeah.
reported that Pam Bondi, the attorney general, told Donald Trump in May that he was in the files, which means that Donald Trump has been lying to the American public for the past 2 months. And I've said they've been engaging in a cover up. Your take on this, Seth?
Well, I mean, there's been another discovery. I think CBS News also yesterday looked back at the original tapes of the Epstein suicide that was available or that was initially released. And I think they found that that was also edited in mysterious ways, and there was unexplained edits. There was missing footage, a whole bunch of things that went along with that. This was Bill Barr's era as Attorney General. So you've got both Pam Bondi and Bill Barr in different Trump administrations covering up, really, what's happened with Epstein's death. Uh, you
And
know,
Bill Barr's dad was the one who first brought him into this ring. Bill
yeah,
Barr's father was the one who gave him the cushy job in
yeah,
New
and
York, even though this man is a college dropout and had no experience.
yeah, and Bill Barr, was a CIA. He worked for the CIA for a few years under George Bush. So it's not actually, you add all these things together, you sort of start seeing a broad picture. He was also the guy who who pardoned all those Iran-Contra people, in the later
Right.
administration. So
Right.
he was referred to in a Village Voice article as the cover-up general. That was his his title. And so, it's not surprising that he tried to cover up the suicide. But even worse than that, he was in Epstein's cell apparently a few days before the suicide. Where I don't know what he was doing there. I don't know why Bill Barr decided he
Tracy's
needed
on it. Look at that, Tracy. We have a smart audience. Did
to.
Bill Barr visit the
Yes.
2 weeks before Epstein died?
Yeah, yeah, he did. I mean, as far as we know, I mean, that's strange, why is the attorney general visiting this, known pedophile slash billionaire? Well, they had a relationship together. While Epstein was working for his dad, I believe Bill Barr was at still at Columbia, although also a CIA operative at the time. And they would have crossed paths for sure. They would have been of similar ages and they would have crossed paths.
And another question: why is Todd Blanche, who was Donald Trump's personal attorney and now Deputy Attorney General, why is he spending 2 full days, or rather, I should say, he spent 2 full days with Glenn Maxwell under a shroud of secrecy? And lo and behold, Zev, 2 days after, the attorneys of Glenn Maxwell are now publicly saying and appealing to both the Supreme Court and Donald Trump for a pardon. Zev, your take on this?
Well, this is a cover-up. I mean, this is clearly a cover-up of, epic proportions, but it's happening in broad daylight. So it's sort of weird to see it because clearly what the president is trying to do is trying to remove himself from the narrative that is the Epstein story and just go to the original narrative, which is to set up Democrats. One of the things I keep pointing out to people is that Epstein's target audience when he was trying to blackmail politicians was Democrats, because he wanted to convince them not to be pro-Palestine. He was worried about the Republicans. He was going after Democrats. So because that was the target, there was a lot of Democrats in that circle. And that's why there is this QAnon theory and this whole thing that's been going on about there being a cabal of Democrats involved in pedophilia.
Yeah.
They were not. I mean, maybe one or two of them were along the way, but the reality of it is they were just the targets of Epstein's influence operation, and that's why you see so many Democrats. Now, Trump is going to try, and Ghislaine Maxwell are going to try and convince us all that that's the story. That the Democrats were involved in some pedophile ring with Jeffrey Epstein. They're going to wall it off like that, and they're going to tell us that the rest of it isn't happening. It wasn't true. Now, unfortunately, we know what the other stuff is, and so it's going to be very hard for them to convince the media and also everybody else that's been calling for the truth around Jeffrey Epstein that they are telling the truth. So, despite their attempts at cover up here, and I do think it is a cover up attempt of mammoth proportions,
I agree.
It's
This is a massive cover up and
yeah,
done by the most incompetent, reckless people in real
yeah.
time.
Yeah, and it's sort of like, why are you doing it? Because everyone knows the cover-up is worse than the crime sometimes. The fact that they're covering it up is going to expose everything else, which is, for me, it's all these financial crimes. It's all these financial, because it doesn't stop with just giving these intelligence operatives tons of money and they hide all the money. It lands up being involved in all these collapses of major corporations and crashing the economy on various occasions, like savings and loans. And in 2008, like there's a lot of rigging of the economy that goes on with this money laundering that was happening. And, we're talking hundreds of billions, if not certainly more than $100 billion, I would say, maybe hundreds of billions at the end of the day, that has just been taken out of the American economy by these various groups.
I want to mention two names when it comes to the money, right? Because
Yeah.
it's always fascinated me. We mentioned him before; he's dead now, and he went public and talked about his role with Epstein, and he was remorseful about his role in what was then the largest Ponzi scheme scandal ever.
Mm.
Hofsberger, talk to us
Hoffenberg.
about Hofsberger and Epstein's role in it, and why Epstein got away scot free.
Well, I mean, Hoffenberg asked that question so many times. I got to know Steve Hoffenberg quite closely. He was one of the key sources in my original investigation in 2019. And by accident, I called him up and there he was, and suddenly we became friends and he gave me a lot of information. Hoffenberg was claimed to be a sort of reformed man. I don't know if that was entirely true, but he certainly claimed it. And he did spend 18 years in jail for this crime that he says and convincingly says that Epstein actually committed. He was the architect of. And he had proof that Epstein worked at Towers Financial. Towers is a very interesting company at the end of the day because it was partly a collections agency. It was partly an investment firm. And it's unclear how they made their money, because they had this weird accounting practice where they kept writing down a certain amount of money, showing that they had a profit. The reality of it was, it probably was a money laundering enterprise, and amongst its clients was Adnan Khashoggi and the Marcuses,
Mm.
who had a lot of money to actually launder. And so it's believed that instead of needing to wash this money any other way, they would invest, or they'd buy investment products out of Towers, and then Towers would wash it for them through their various collections and other investments. And then out of it will come clean money. And maybe as much as $2 billion was washed through Towers Financial, until Epstein decided to collapse it, leaving himself $450 million, according to Hoffenberg. So, I do he died last year, and I sort of had I value his ability to share the amount of information he did, because he was clearly putting himself in great risk by sharing everything he did. And having spent, I think, the longest time with Epstein out of any person that I found, like 9 years together, he knew a lot about Epstein. He certainly asked Epstein a lot of things at the time. And I'll tell you one of the stories that really struck me the day Epstein died. I called him up because it was Saturday morning, and I remember hearing the news and calling him up and saying, hey, Steve, I've got some really bad news for you. Epstein died last night. And Steve was in the hospital. He was in having a procedure being done I think it was Massachusetts or somewhere like that. Maybe that's wrong, but maybe the hospital location's wrong. But I will say that he was having this procedure, and he freaked out when I told him that Epstein had died. He immediately thought his life was at risk. He told all the nurses and doctors to not administer anything to him. He did not want anything happening to him that day. He wanted to cancel the procedure. He was convinced that he was going to be killed. And I said, if he wouldn't let me off the phone for like an hour, just listening to him, insisting on seeing the doctors, insisting on seeing the head nurse. And you could tell that it was just sheer panic that he thought he was going to be in there, which suggests maybe he was closer to Epstein than we realized at the time. And perhaps he was sharing information. Epstein at the tail end of his life was singing. He was telling authorities what they wanted to know. And, that is probably why he landed up dying the way he did.
And I had this conversation with Vicky Ward at 12 p.m., which I'll have up later. And the second time I talked to her, Vicky also told us, even today again, that when she did the reporting on Jeffrey Epstein, which was in 2003 for Vanity Fair, and back in the days, folks, Vanity Fair was huge. The pharmacists came and gave their on the record report of being abused and by not just Jeffrey Epstein, but also Maxwell. She puts it in the piece, and then Epstein threatens her unborn kids, threatens her husband, and also allegedly threatens Graydon Carter, who was the editor at the time of Vanity Fair. And lo and behold, once her article was published, the Farmer Sisters account was completely scrubbed. So I completely believe it, man. If you're dealing with all these powerful people, the fact that, he said that he was scared that he might be iced, right? And Virginia Dupre, who was the 16-year-old spa attendant who Donald Trump yesterday said Epstein stole from her. She died by suicide in April. Really, really tough life. But her father thinks also that some foul play might be at hand. But, she was going through a lot. And again, folks, Robert Maxwell, who died, it's not a conspiracy theory that a lot of folks close to it think he died in mysterious ways.
I mean, Rod Black died. It was Epstein's lawyer died last week or 2 weeks ago. There's a lot of bodies littered around this story, because a lot of people don't want the story out. So it's a tricky one to report, and it's a tricky one for all of us to get around. I mean, it's important that everyone sort of starts, focusing on all these other parts of the story, because I believe that they're crucial in understanding how Donald Trump got in power, and it's also probably crucial in how to undo his power. But because of that, we need as many eyes and ears and people of influence like you, and thank you so much for doing this, in terms of sharing this content, because if it lands up just being one or two lone voices out there, it's easy to silence. But the more people we can get sharing this information, the more we are going to get the truth out. And I think that the truth here will set us free in a very very clear way. I think this could be one of the keys that could end the sort of autocratic sort of creep that we're having in our country, and this could really solve the issue, or at least weaken the Trump administration to some extent. And certainly his policies, his approval rating now is pretty low compared to where he was, largely due to the Epstein handling. So, we can't let the cover up succeed. And we need as many eyes and ears and people like yourself pushing these storylines, because they're true. I mean, the thing is, the American taxpayer has been the victim of a multi-billion-dollar crime spree that lasted 40 years. I mean, you think about how many hopes and dreams and lives were squandered during all those crashes, and how many, the American dream was really squandered, and all that trillions of debts that we keep wondering about how we got so much in debt and what are we going to do about. Well, that was part of the bailouts that these guys used to fund their empires, So it's important that we're all recognize that we're all victims to some extent of this enormous crime spree.
I want to ask you two more questions, if you have a little bit of time, if you
Yeah.
don't mind, because I mentioned two names, and you mentioned you talked about one of them. The other name that I just cannot let go of, because I believe we should follow the money. And I believe once you follow the money, this opaque money, right? How Epstein, a guy with no real discernible skills and who was a college dropout, was sitting with multi-million-dollar
Mm.
properties all across the world, and had all this access to billions of dollars, right? Another name, Leslie Wexner,
Mm.
who is still alive, who is the CEO of Victoria's Secret, who gave Jeffrey Epstein power of attorney, like literally control over his financial empire, and gifted him his $77 million prime real estate townhouse in Manhattan. Do you have information on Wexner? Why, oh, why would this man give Epstein so much?
I mean, there's a number of theories around that. I don't know the definitive answer. I will say that Wexner was very close to Israel, and there was a relationship with Israel involved there. There is speculation that there was even a relationship between Epstein and Wexner. There was actually
Right.
a real love affair that maybe have outlived any of the other interactions he had romantically. Um, Epstein was worked for Wexner in the early or mid '80s, I think. There's speculation that he was involved in some sort of unusual murder that happened in the Wexner world, and some of that may have contributed to it. But clearly, Wexner thought he was a financial genius and gave him all this money, gave him all of these. He was the guy who was signing off on a lot of the L brand shares. He had all these shares stuffed away in a British Virgin Islands offshore account that Epstein was making decisions for Victoria's Secrets and L Brands, which also included Abercrombie and Fitch at the time. So you've got it's. Do I know why? I don't know why. I know that the history of the Wexner organization aligns with other movement of illegal things, like in the bootlegging days. Maybe they were involved in moving some illegal liquor from the Canada and other places into North America. But you've got sort of an organized criminal footprint as well that existed in the Victoria's Secret's Abercrombie empire. Now, I will say Wexner, of all the people that I've covered over the years, is probably the most aggressive in terms of his responses. So I'm more cautious about him than anybody else when I talk about him, because he certainly, he lets you know when he doesn't like your coverage or doesn't
He's
like your coverage.
litigious, as they say. And so far, what we said is all facts. That
Yeah.
yes, he gifted his $77 million townhouse to Jeffrey Epstein. Yes, he gave his power of attorney to Jeffrey Epstein. These are all facts, folks. Not a conspiracy theory. No, I just have a question. Why? Why would a man like Wexner, who is so brilliant, not necessarily brilliant, but in the sense that a billionaire, right? They're very careful about their money and who they trust with their money. And it's just interesting, which is why, and he's still alive, folks. Maybe some good questions to ask. The final question I want to ask you is about
Mm,
Trump. But before I get there, I think
mm,
the reason why it makes sense to me, right? And this is, if I'm a foreign country and I'm
mhm,
foreign intelligence, Zev.
Mm,
And I see a man who has access to powerful individuals who invites them to his island.
mm,
And I've been told that this man loves young girls. And I've been told that this man brings other wealthy, powerful men to his island or to his resort in Florida or to his townhouse where they do things with young girls, illegal things. And if I'm just foreign intelligence of any country, to me, that's an opening. That's an opening. I'm like, oh, I can get blackmail material on these powerful people.
mm,
I can use this individual and get information that then I can trade or use, for
mm.
diplomacy or for money. And so, the blackmail aspect of this, what can you separate from fact or fiction when it comes to Epstein being able to get money from people, not just because he had the reputation of being a billionaire, which Leland Nally, another investigative journalist, talked to me about. This myth of a reputation that somehow just because you're a billionaire, you're very brilliant, right?
Mm,
Which is bullshit. Leland Nally said that a lot of people who came to Jeffrey Epstein's dinner parties did not see a stunning intellect, saw
mm,
very basic dumbass questions asked by him, right? He's not that bright, much like Elon Musk and all these other
mm.
people. But the blackmail aspect of it, because I'm just thinking strategically like a supervillain,
Yeah.
that is a gold mine for me if I want to get blackmail on powerful people. But what do we separate from fact from fiction here when it comes to the blackmail?
Well, one of the things I'd say is that it's not necessarily for money. The expectation is that there's money trading hands here, but the blackmail can be about power and about policy. And certainly Israel's intentions, as I was told by Ari Ben Menashe in setting up Ghislaine and Jeffrey, was about them blackmailing politicians in order to influence American policy towards Israel and the Middle East. And so you can see how that plays differently than just, hey, I've got a piece of tape that could compromise you. It's interesting that Wexner's house was already rigged with all this surveillance material when Epstein moved in. So it wasn't like it was after the fact that Epstein added there. So maybe Wexner was doing similar kinds of things in his past. But blackmail's it's the oldest trick in the book for intelligence agencies. Of course, this is what they use. If they're trying to influence policy, if they're trying to influence anybody, they would get something about their private life and threaten to expose it. And here was something that they were setting up to be, as Ari Ben Menashe told me, the having affairs with people, sleeping around with people is not maybe not good, but it's not a crime. Sleeping with underage girls is a crime. So the blackmail material they had was really serious. It wasn't, it was, these women weren't really super young. They were in many cases. In some cases, they were just under the age, just so they could get the criminal aspect of them through. And so they were trying to compromise people based on that criminal side of it, not just the sleeping around with women. And that is why it's so pernicious what they did, because these people face complete collapse if they didn't follow the instructions or requests of any of these organizations or foreign governments. Now, did it actually happen? Did anybody get told, don't do this or do that? I don't know. I know that Bill Richardson was involved. I know George Mitchell was involved, but I don't know how much influence was put upon them. And Bill Clinton too. We just don't know the influence that actually happened during the time.
And I want to remind folks before we get to Donald Trump finally, there are real victims here, folks. Virginia Giuffre
Mm,
was 16 years old, a spa attendant, working at Mar-a-Lago when Ghislaine saw her, stalked her, scoped her, recruited her, took her away from Donald Trump, as Donald Trump said yesterday, stole her from me.
mm,
And then she was passed around, and this is a quote from Virginia Giuffre, I was passed around like a platter of fruit
mm,
to Jeffrey Epstein and his powerful associates, not just here in America, but abroad. And one of the people that she mentioned, and a photo was revealed, was Prince Andrew.
mm,
With his arm around Virginia, and for 2 years she was stuck in this just gosh the trauma. Can you? Hopefully people don't have to ever imagine, but
mm,
that's what happened to this young girl for 2 years, and then she was finally able to escape. So it's not just pedophilia; it's an international sex trafficking ring, and with that, what MAGA has done is taking, conspiracy theory is always based on a little bit of fact.
mm,
You take a little bit of the yarn and then you spin it, right? And that's where QAnon came about, right? QAnon is this international cabal of liberals and opponents of Donald Trump who are not just pedophiles, but murderers and also worship the devil. And Dan Bongino and Kash Patel and Donald Trump went ahead with this conspiracy theory that has radicalized people to commit violence for the past 10 years because they said the only person who can clean the deep state, the only person who can reveal this deep state, the only person who will show you that these liberals are part of an international cabal is Donald Trump. So
Mhm.
then they get elected. And then the base, who has been radicalized, said, okay, give me the Epstein files. And
Yep.
Pam Bondi says, we'll wait on that for a second. And then they say, here's some binders. And then they say, guess what? Don't worry about it.
Yeah. Nothing to
Just
see here.
yeah,
Nothing to
nothing to
see
see
here.
here,
Yeah.
nothing to see here, nothing to see here.
Yeah.
And then, as we know from Wall Street Journal's reporting, folks, they were lying to you because
Mhm.
Pam Bondi told Trump in May that he was in the files. And then when Donald Trump was asked about it in July, he lied by ABC
Yeah.
News. He lied about it. So this is where I come to you, Zev, and say the following. Donald Trump is a convicted criminal. America
Mhm.
didn't care. Donald Trump bragged about grabbing women by the pee. America didn't care. Donald Trump has a history of being racist and misogynist. America didn't care. Donald
Mhm.
Trump is a fraudster, held been liable for fraud. America didn't care. Donald Trump was held liable for sexually assaulting E. Jean Carroll. America didn't care.
Mhm.
Why is Epstein freaking him out? Why is this the kryptonite?
Well, because they were working on the same networks. I mean, it's hard, when I talk about networks, I'm talking about powerful individuals that cooperate with each other doing all sorts of activities, criminal and otherwise. And when you really look at the true tracks of Epstein and Trump, they both come out of Russia's policy in the 1982. They had this idea of, and it had been a long studied Russian idea that they would infect capitalism with their money.
Mm.
And they'd infected with all their dirty money that was coming out of drug deals and everything else out of Russia that they'd stolen. And as the Soviet Union was ending, through Robert Maxwell as well, that money was started sifting through into the West, and they were looking for vehicles to launder that money into the system. And the two people that well, it's documented that Donald Trump made a lot of his money off Russian investors from organized crime in the early '80s. That certainly invested in his condos and through his casinos laundered a lot of money. And Epstein too.
And also through Deutsche Bank, right?
Yeah,
That
yeah.
saved him.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the key things about Deutsche Bank. And here's one of the most unbelievable clues that the Russians always do this kind of stuff. I think it was August 13th. What's the date? It was 2013. I think that Jeffrey Epstein became a client of Deutsche Bank on the very same day. And I might be getting the date wrong, so I'll just double check it for you in a second. But on the very same day, Donald Trump became a new client again of Deutsche Bank's private wealth division. So both of these guys show up on this exact same day at this new division, even though they'd previously been told by the bank that they wouldn't be lending Donald Trump a cent. At the same time, Deutsche Bank had, been involved in this Russian money laundering scheme for a long period of time. And so what you're seeing here is a tell by August 19th, 2013. August 19th is a very important date because on August 19 in was my late 90s. Let me get the exact date here. Sorry, I should have been prepared for this. But the coup against Gorbachev, the hardline coup against Gorbachev, which was significant to Maxwell and significant to the guy who ran the Maxwell operation, Cherbikov, happened on August 19th. And so, when you look at some of the Russian intelligence ops, they often have these dates that are anniversaries of another date that tell you that it's Russian intelligence. It's like a little signature that they leave behind, a calling card, if you will. And that Deutsche Bank date is so significant for me because why did these guys land up getting approval to be, clients of Deutsche Bank at a time when Deutsche Bank and every other bank in the world was not going to lend them a cent? And suddenly, out of nowhere, they became these clients. Well, why did they become these clients? Well, my guess is it's got to do with Russia and Vladimir Putin.
But that's follow the money, folks. Follow the
Yeah,
money,
yeah,
and that's why finally Democrats and Ron Wyden, who has a good track record,
yeah,
is talking about following the money, right?
yeah.
And what's really interesting because we try to this is independent. I don't bend the knee to Democrats or Republicans. I speak without fear or favor. I want to ask you this because
Mm,
I just want to keep the receipts. As you mentioned, everyone's following the Epstein scandal. This is a weakness for Donald Trump. He's negative double digits on
mm,
this. Nancy Pelosi is very smart when it comes to politics. She always counts the votes. She comes on MSNBC, I think it was last week,
mhm.
and says, well, this is a distraction. We should get back to bread and butter issues. And I'm sitting there thinking, Nancy, For the first time in 10 years, you see Donald Trump weak. You see him backtracking. You see his own base attacking him. You see friggin' Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson, all these other people saying, whoa, 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 tell us more about Epstein. You see MAGA. Literally, the reason why this isn't the mainstream news, folks, is because MAGA on the right wing has led it. Wall Street Journal, Fox News, and then corporate media was then given permission. Oh, we can talk about this stuff. Why would Nancy Pelosi say this?
I don't know. I don't know why Nancy Pelosi would say this. I think that we're seeing Donald Trump do two things that are sort of contradictory. On the one hand, he's giving life to the story every day by adding narrative points that makes no sense. He doesn't want to talk about it one day. The next day, he's covering his tracks by saying something else around Virginia Giuffre. So I don't know why he's doing both these things at the same time. He views it as an opportunity as well. If he's able to succeed in blaming the Democrats for everything and this cover-up succeeds, it's a huge victory for him if he's actually able to pull that off. Now, if he's not able to pull that off, which it does, I struggle to see how he's going to do that with all this information that's emerging around him.
He's failed so far. He's failed. Yeah. All the distractions have failed.
Yeah, but is it potentially a distraction? Is Donald Trump going to get off at the end of the day just because he's Donald Trump? Is he Teflon Don to the point where, it's just another scandal that he's able to throw out there? Or as we've seen in previous impeachments, these guys are so good at the disinformation. They're so good at the blurring of everything and the making, that they might have a way of getting him off, So it's certainly not a safe, it's not definitely going to get this president out of power. It is just one of those things that we should know the truth about. Not because, because we should know the truth about what happened in the last 50 years. And maybe that's the thing that Nancy Pelosi is hiding. She was part of the Gang of Eight. She certainly knew everything that the intelligence community was doing over those 50 years. This can't have not been part of their purview. Maybe they know that a lot of people are compromised by what happened over those 50 years.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
And perhaps some other names. They want to protect the legacy. But I think you and I are on the same page. I don't care. I don't care if it's liberals, celebrities, philanthropists, presidents. If it was proven that these associates and friends of Epstein were complicit in the assault and abuse and rape of girls, F them all to hell. And I think that's why the story is so important. It's about justice and accountability, and it's a bipartisan story, folks, that has radicalized MAGA. And they radicalized their own base with this, folks. They radicalized their own base with it. This is the Frankenstein's monster that has escaped the lab and has turned on the creators. And I believe this is his weakness. I believe it's his kryptonite. I believe that Rupert Murdoch senses the weakness. Elon Musk sensed the weakness. And I believe the knives have been sharpened and now they're in the stabby motion. Now, does that mean that Donald Trump, gets removed from office? No, but weakening, it happens in many different ways. You can weaken your political influence. You can weaken your presidency. I believe that's what we're witnessing. And also with Rupert Murdoch meeting J.D. Vance right before Wall Street Journal dropped that first article.
It's very weird. Very weird.
I think they smell blood on the water, and now they're trying to get more blood. Zev, I kept you much longer, but we finally were able to talk.
I'm so thrilled you had me on. Thank you so much. Really, great to chat to you. And you know your stuff. You really know your stuff well.
I'm surprised. I try to do the work, but you're the experts, and I just try to connect the dots for folks. And I hope this is the first of many meetings. My audience, like I said, talk to Zev. I'm like, all right, I will. So I really appreciate you joining me, especially at the last second. And hopefully you can come back sooner than later when you're free. Before I let you go, please shamelessly promote yourself. How can people read you? How can people find you?
Well, I hope you come on my show as well, which I do on narrative.org, narrativ.org. I spelled the thing differently, and it's confusing people every time when they try to find it. So I'll just spell it again, Narativ. What I'm doing right now on narrative.org is the Greatest Heist series, which looks at Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump, in various chapters. We're into chapter 3 right now. Chapter 4 is coming out next, and it will talk all about this Virginia Giuffre unstolen thing and how it relates to Leslie Wexner's property in Palm Beach. And it's a really interesting story. We reveal something brand new about that financial exchange that happened with Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump for the purchase of that home, the Maison La Amity. So that's part of part 4. It's coming out, so people should check it out at narrative.org, narrativ.org.
Narrative.org. Also become a subscriber to Zev's Substack. And folks, this has been another episode of The Left Hook. I'll be back in about 10 minutes with Danielle Moody, my Democracy-ish co-host. We do our midweek check-in, news of the day. So come back in 10 minutes. And at 4 p.m., I'm going to talk to a journalist who did a really good connecting the dots. And I'm so glad people are talking about Jay Willis. We have Emile Beauvais, probably a supervillain, who is now a permanent judge, one of the worst of the worst. And the reason why we have him, folks, and people might not like hearing it, 50-49, he barely got in, is because 3 Democratic senators a few months ago refused to accept President Biden's nomination, Justice Manji, highly qualified judge who was Muslim American and was smeared by
Mm.
disinformation by the right wing. And 3 Democratic senators went along with it. There was a vacancy, and now the vacancy is filled by Emile Beauvais. That
Unbelievable.
just unbelievable. This is
Yeah.
America. 1,200 people have been watching us. We've been speaking for the past 15 minutes. For though I know many people tuned in late, I strongly recommend hearing this conversation from the start. Zev and I will have it up on our Substacks later today with transcripts. So tune in, listen to Zev. He's done all the work. He connects the dots. There's a lot, folks. And what's important, again, like I always say, we don't want to be conspiracy theorists because there's too much
Mm.
disinformation. So we separate fact from fiction, and Zev is really good at that. What's an allegation? He'll tell you is an allegation. What's he's heard from the horse's mouth? He'll tell you. What's out there in the open? He'll tell you. And that's why we tried to connect the dots right way, right today. The money trail, it goes beyond Epstein and it goes beyond Trump. And that's probably why a lot of people have been quiet for the past 2 decades with this information that was
Mm.
right there out in the open. But hopefully, inshallah, there will be justice, especially for these women and these girls. Some of them who are no longer with us because they have killed themselves. People like Virginia Giuffre. Zeb, thank you so much, buddy. And everyone else, be kind, be empathetic, and please, oh, please don't be a fascist. Take care.
Cheers. Thank you so much.